Welcome to the studio. In today's video, I am going to show you how I design and then print and then use rice paper to make an art journal. I use Photoshop Elements to create my designs, and this is the paper that I printed on. It is Japanese rice paper. It comes in a package of 30 sheets. One side is super smooth and the other side has the texture on it, which is similar to all of the commercial rice paper that you get. This Japanese rice paper is size A4, which means it is a little bit longer and a little bit narrower than our standard copy paper. But as you can see, it prints really bright, a little bit, just a little bit translucent, but it's beautiful and wonderful to work with. I use a real nondescript copier. It is not a fancy copier at all. It is an inkjet copier, and you can see that it prints perfectly and comes out of the copier just right. So now we're going to do some art journaling, and I'm going to show you how I use my papers. First thing I do is I always rip a bunch of paper for the background just to give me some texture and to start building up my design. And I'm just using an old art magazine that already had pages that were stuck together, so it's perfect for me to just recycle it, reuse it. I'm also just using Mod Podge because that is what I have at hand, and I always recommend use what you have. Whatever products you have on hand, those are what you should be using. So I am just gluing these down with Mod Podge, overlapping them, and just kind of filling in the center of the design, actually. Most of this will get covered up by the various layers, but you will still see a little bit of it sneaking through, peeking through at the end. And once I have all of that background paper glued down, it's time for a little color. And this whole spread is turquoise and blues. So I am putting some turquoise paint in the background, and I'm using Debbie's DIY paint because it's what we have and it was what is opened. And I am also, once I'm done getting all this paint down, I'm actually going to seal it with an aerosol sealer, just because Debbie's DIY paint reactivates with liquids, and I don't need it to reactivate while I am adding the layers. I used two different blues of Debbie's paint, and I will put the colors in the link below. And once I have the whole thing all painted, then I am going to go on to the next step. My art journaling is one layer after another until I feel it's done. I do know I'm going to use some blue butterflies. I know that I am using the paper that I made, but I don't have an exact idea of what the design is going to look like. I do add the sealer with the aerosol sealer off camera, and then I come back and I am going to use some modeling paste and add some texture through a stencil. So I'm just using a palette knife and using the modeling paste and just adding kind of arbitrarily. Just in several places along the edges of this design. So the modeling paste is white, but it is not going to stay white. We're actually going to spritz it with some color at the end. But it takes a little while for it to dry. So again, off camera, I let it dry, and then we're going to start again with the next layer. So this is the paper that I made. This is one of my papers, and this is a paper that I printed on that rice paper. And I'm doing the same thing that I did with the script paper from the magazine. I am just going to rip some of it. Now, normally I would have glued this down before I did the modeling paste, but I did a little backwards this time. So I've ripped it, and now I am going to put it on my spread. I also had a little piece of some recycled tissue paper, which I found from another project, and because it's the right color blue, I'm going to add that to this design also. I like to use what I have, and I love it when I can use up scraps that I have from other projects. So again, I am just simply going to rip these pieces, and I'm going to lay them out so I can see about how many I need and probably see where they are going to look best. So I glue some of them right over the modeling paste. It doesn't make any difference. I just keep gluing them all down. And once they are all glued down, and I've glued them down and then I've sealed them in, then it is time to put on another layer. And I was working on these butterflies that I wanted to use for this project. So I made the paper, the design on my Photoshop elements. And basically, there's not a lot of layers because basically I just drag them in and then I print them, and they are printed on the rice paper. And now I am going to fussy cut them out and use them in my design. These butterflies have a lot of black on them, so I did seal them before I used them. I sealed them and let the sealer dry before I glued them down, just because the black from the copier is the only color that actually smears. So, and why would you use rice paper? Rice paper just is so nice to work with. The edges kind of just fade into the background. It's nice and thin. The texture of it with having the fibers in the background just can enhance your design, and it's just a nice paper to work with. It does take a little while to cut these out, and I go right ahead and cut off the antennae, and then I use a permanent pen or a permanent writer to add them back in the design. So I did use this dragonfly. You can hardly see him though because he's kind of uh, I glued him down on a spot where there's a lot of texture in the background. But the butterflies really are nice and bright. So while I was cutting out the butterflies, I had a bunch of paper that was left that had nothing on the back of it. And so I stamped a bunch of sentiment. So I am going to stamp these all. And actually, I stamped them in this antique vintage photo. And when I put it down on the design, I didn't really like it. So then I went ahead and re-stamped them in black and just glued them right over it. Best part about art journaling, if you don't like the way something came out, you just glue something else right over it. I also cut out and used one of the decoupage queen typography pages with the sentiment on it. And here's a little bit of a sneak peek of one of the corners of what it came out like. And this is the decoupage queen sentiment paper. And I ended up also changing that and using a Matisse. There are always flowers for those who want to see them, is the sentiment that I ended up using. These journal pages are really an inspiration, something for me to look back on and just get inspired with the sentiment. Art journaling for me is therapy, relaxing therapy. Okay, it's time to glue the butterflies down. So one by one, I glued them down, and you'll notice they're not quite as translucent as they were, and that is because of the fact that they already have a top coat on them, but they handled exactly like rice paper would anyway. You don't get any corners curling up. They just lay down perfectly. I really like working with rice paper. I do not work with napkins very well. I find them really difficult to work with. When I have a page that opens up, I always do it as a spread, meaning I do the same thing on one page as I do on the other so that they kind of go together. Not exactly the same, not a mirror image, but just so that they're part of the same. It's one big page. The sentiments, just everything I've done. I've repeated it on the other side also. So, other than the magazine paper in the background, the papers for this spread were designed and printed on a home printer with rice paper. There are a few things that I didn't seem to get on camera, but you'll notice them on the design at the end. One of them is the IOD stamp pattern play, which is a bunch of small little designs. They're probably like around 4 by 4, and I love them. They're one of the first generation stamps, and they're perfect for art journaling because they put texture and they're great designs. You can see it right there along the corner of the page. So that's what those little polka dots are. That is what the little curly cues are up at the top, are one of those stamps, and also the little flowery branch. I like to splatter, but for this design, I actually sprayed medium mist on it. So this is what we did. We went from designing a paper all the way to printing it. And then this is the design. These are the 2 pages that I used for that paper.